Artificial Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Artificial Podcast. Frontier Podcast.
Ever get that feeling like words have power, like beyond their literal meaning? We're diving into that idea today.
Okay.
Specifically, the idea that words, sounds, even thoughts could influence water.
Interesting.
You sent over some YouTube videos on Dr. Masaru Emoto, you know, the guy who froze water crystals.
Right.
And I gotta admit, those images are pretty wild. But is there any science behind it all? Let's unpack this with our expert.
Well, it's a question that has captivated people for centuries, right? Yeah. This notion that words hold a power beyond just what we hear, you see it popping up in myths and spiritual traditions.
It's true. Even
just like everyday anxieties about saying the wrong thing.
Totally.
What Dr. Emoto did was bring that concept, that somewhat mystical concept, into the realm of physical observation with his water crystal experiment.
Right. For those who might not be familiar, Emoto was a Japanese researcher. He believed that human consciousness could actually change the molecular structure of water.
Okay.
He would photograph frozen water crystals, and the results, I'm telling you, they were striking.
Yeah.
Water exposed to words like love or gratitude, they form these intricate, symmetrical crystals.
Beautiful.
But then when exposed to more negative words like hate or you idiot, the crystals were jumbled, almost chaotic.
Interesting. It certainly sparks curiosity. We need to approach this with a critical lens, though.
Of course, of course.
The scientific community has expressed concerns about Emoto's methods, mainly around, let's say, the consistency of his controls.
Okay.
There's the argument that subjective interpretation may have influenced which images he chose to present. It's also worth noting that he declined to participate in James Randi's $1 Million Challenge.
Oh, yeah.
A public test for proof of paranormal abilities.
So a healthy dose of skepticism is definitely warranted. But even if Emoto's methods weren't, like, bulletproof, he wasn't the only one exploring these ideas.
Right.
You also sent over some information on Professor Bernhard Krepplin, an aerospace researcher from Germany. He had this water lab where they studied water droplets at incredibly high magnification. What's their connection to all of this?
Well, Kreplin's team, they made a fascinating observation. Even water droplets from the same source, examined at the exact same time, produced different microscopic images.
Oh, wow.
It was like each droplet had its own unique fingerprint.
Really?
They then took this a step further and introduced a flower, a petunia, into a water sample.
Okay.
After a period of time, they observed that the water droplets from that sample began to take on structural similarities to the petunia.
Get out.
Yeah, it's as if the water somehow remembered interacting with the flower.
Okay, now that is wild.
Yeah.
But how does that connect back to Emoto's work with words and intentions influencing water?
Well, I think it speaks to the broader concept of water as a receiver and potential retainer of information.
Okay.
While Kreplin's team wasn't using words, they were exploring whether water, at its most fundamental level, is influenced by its surroundings.
Right.
And their research suggests that it might be.
It's definitely making me look at my water glass a little differently.
Yeah.
But speaking of things we can actually interact with, let's talk about the rice experiment.
Okay.
This one feels much more accessible. What's the idea behind it?
The rice experiment is fascinating because of its simplicity. You take cooked rice, divide it into identical containers, and then expose each container to different words or intentions.
Okay.
Some get positive affirmations like, thank you or I love you.
Right.
While others receive negative phrases.
So you've got these jars of rice, each labeled with a different word or phrase, all stored under the same conditions. What happens?
The common observation is that the rice exposed to positive words tends to remain relatively pristine.
Okay.
While the rice exposed to negative words often shows signs of decay, mold growth, discoloration much faster.
I've seen some of those time-lapse videos online.
Right.
And it's pretty startling.
Yeah.
While it might not be a controlled lab setting, the visual difference is hard to ignore. And it's not just rice, right? I've heard of people doing similar experiments with plants.
Yeah, exactly.
Talking nicely to one and, well, not so nice to the other.
Exactly. And the results tend to mirror the rice experiment. The plant receiving positive reinforcement often thrives, while the verbally abused plant often withers.
Wow.
This is where things get really interesting because it begs the question, if words can have a visible effect on plants, and plants are mostly water, what about us?
Right.
Humans are around 70% water, after all.
Okay, so if words can impact a glass of water, a bowl of rice, a plant, it's not a huge leap to think they could impact us on some level.
Right.
We've all felt that little energy boost from a genuine compliment.
Sure.
And conversely, how hurtful words can really sting.
Precisely. It goes back to that mind-body connection.
Yeah.
And this is where the concept of water memory starts to get particularly fascinating and controversial within the context of health and healing.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned homeopathy, for example.
Right. Homeopathy uses highly diluted substances, sometimes to the point where there's literally no molecule of the original substance left. It's like giving someone a drop of chamomile tea that's been diluted in an entire ocean.
And yet, homeopaths believe that even at those extreme dilutions, the water somehow retains the memory or essence of the original substance and can still have a therapeutic effect.
So are they saying the water is somehow altered by its past interactions, even if we can't detect any physical trace of the original substance? Is that even possible?
It's a concept that many in the scientific community find difficult to reconcile with our current understanding of chemistry and physics.
Right.
But then again, our understanding of water is constantly evolving.
That's true.
We've talked about its unusual properties, its ability to exist in 3 states, its high surface tension, its powerful solvent capabilities.
Right.
These properties, all of which are crucial for life as we know it, hint at a complexity we are only beginning to explore.
So you're saying water, being this fundamental building block of life, might be capable of things we don't yet fully understand, like maybe this memory capability.
It's certainly a possibility worth considering.
Yeah.
And the idea of water being receptive to human consciousness isn't new.
Right.
It's echoed in ancient cultures around the world.
True.
Think about the rituals associated with water blessings, baptisms, purification ceremonies.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost as if there's this innate understanding across cultures and throughout history that water is more than just H2O.
I like that. Even if we can't explain it scientifically yet,
Yeah.
there's something intuitive about the idea that water, this life-giving substance, might be more receptive to our thoughts and emotions than we realize. And haven't we all had those moments where being near water, a leak, a waterfall, the ocean, fills us with a sense of peace and awe, almost transformative? It's true, there's just something about being near water that can be so grounding and revitalizing. But before we get too carried away in the feel-good vibes, let's bring it back to the research a little bit.
Hey.
We've touched on some intriguing concepts, but I imagine some listeners might be feeling a bit skeptical,
Sure.
Is there anything in the research that might resonate with those looking for a more, concrete explanation?
That's a great point. And this is where those studies on sound and its impact on water come in.
Okay.
We tend to think of sound as something we hear, obviously,
Right.
but it's also vibration.
Oh, okay.
And those vibrations have a physical impact on the world around us. Think about how a powerful sound can shatter glass.
Right.
It's a transfer of energy.
Right. And we saw that a bit with Emoto's experiments where he exposed water to different kinds of music.
Yeah.
Classical music led to those beautiful, delicate crystals, while heavy metal, not so much. It kind of looked like the water was trying to escape the sound waves.
Exactly. Now, while Emoto's work might not have met the strictest standards of scientific rigor, it pointed toward the idea that sound frequencies can influence the structure of water.
Okay.
And when you think about it, that concept isn't so far-fetched. We know that sound waves have the power to create patterns. Those videos where they put sand on a metal plate and then vibrate the plate with different sound frequencies.
Oh, yeah, the Chladni plate experiments.
Right.
The sand dances around and forms these amazing geometric patterns based on the frequency of the sound waves. They're mesmerizing.
And what's even more interesting is that researchers are finding that certain sound frequencies have specific effects on water.
Okay.
For example, there's a lot of buzz around 432 hertz, sometimes called the healing frequency, because it supposedly resonates with the natural frequency of water, promoting harmony and balance.
Okay, hold on a minute.
Yeah.
Are you saying that if I listen to music tuned to 432 hertz, the water in my body is going to be like, this is my jam. Time to form some beautiful crystals and get this healing party started?
Well, not quite like that.
Okay.
It's not magic. But it does suggest that certain frequencies might have a more harmonizing effect on the water in our bodies, potentially influencing our overall well-being.
Yeah.
And think about it, we already use sound waves in ultrasound technology to image the inside of the body.
Oh, right.
We use them therapeutically to break up kidney stones.
That's true.
So the idea that certain sound frequencies might have subtler, more nuanced effects isn't entirely out there.
Okay, that's a good point. We use sound waves for all sorts of things, so it makes sense that they could have an impact on a molecular level too. And we know water is super receptive to vibration.
Right.
But what about our words themselves? Is there any evidence that beyond just sound waves, our thoughts or intentions can somehow be imprinted on water?
There was a fascinating study where researchers exposed water to a specific frequency, a measurable vibration for a set period. They found that even after the sound source was removed, the water continued to exhibit that same frequency for a significant time afterward. It's like the water remembered the frequency it had been exposed to.
Whoa, okay. So taking that a step further, are you suggesting that our thoughts, which are also a form of energy, could potentially have a similar effect? Like, if we're constantly bombarding ourselves with negative self-talk, that those thought patterns could be, I don't know, subtly influencing the water in our bodies?
It's an intriguing hypothesis.
Yeah.
It circles back to something we discussed earlier, the power of affirmations.
Okay.
If we consistently focus on positive self-talk, on gratitude, on love, could we potentially be creating a more harmonious internal environment, at least on a molecular level?
Interesting.
It's a question worth pondering.
It definitely is. And, makes me think about that saying, you are what you consume.
Right.
We tend to think about that in terms of food, but what if it applies to information too?
Right.
To the words we read, the music we listen to, the thoughts we allow to take root in our minds?
I think that's a powerful takeaway from this deep dive. Regardless of where you stand on the scientific debate around water memory, the possibility that our thoughts and intentions might have a tangible impact on our inner and outer environments is worth considering. What if, by consciously choosing positive words, by cultivating a more mindful internal dialogue, we could potentially influence the very water that sustains us?
Now, that's a thought-provoking way to wrap things up. It's almost like a call to action, right?
Yeah.
To be more aware of the words we use, the thoughts we cultivate, and the energy we bring to the world. To remember that even a single drop, like a ripple in a pond, can have far-reaching effects.
Precisely. And who knows, maybe someday science will catch up with what our intuition already tells us, that we are deeply interconnected with the world around us, and that even our thoughts and words have a power we're only just beginning to understand.
You've given us a lot to think about today. So listeners, here's something to ponder as you go about your day. What if the power to transform our lives, and maybe even the world, begins with the thoughts we choose to water? Until next time, keep those minds curious and those deep dives flowing.
Artificial Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Podcast. Artificial Frontier Podcast.